Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
This week we are observing Kristallnacht, which, as I think most of you know, was really the start of most of the terrible things that befell our community during the Shoah. So we're going to be having some special readings during the service tonight, as well as a special guest speaker. We're going to begin our service on page 171 with the words of the poet Hannah Senesh, Eli, Eli. Eli, Eli, Shelo Yigamer Le'olam, Achol ve'hayam, Rishu Shelo Shabbat, we turn to the blessings for lighting the Shabbat candles. It's my pleasure to call upon Ruth, who is going to lead us in one of the readings and lighting the candles for us.
We read responsively on the top of page 21. This Shabbat sheds light upon us, light for the days to come. We have leisure by which to see the world with new and grateful eyes. We have time now to look inward. And now we are free to embrace family and friends, to make our lives simpler and more complete.
We think of our homes and those we love, when we call to mind the duties and affections of home. How greatly are our blessings enriched, all cares and sorrows softened.
May the hearts of parents and children always be turned to one another, that our homes may be sanctuaries of love and devotion. May we use the Shabbat to bring happiness to our family life and blessing to our people. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu
Page 27, please join with me at the top of the page. The meaning of Shabbat is to celebrate time rather than space. 6 days a week we live under the tyranny of things in space. On Shabbat we try to become attuned to holiness and time. It is a day on which we are called upon to share what is eternal in time, to turn from the results of creation
to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world.
And on page 29, we turn to the words of Lecha Dodi as we welcome the Shabbat. So to share the first reading, Shirley Herman.
On November 9th and 10th, 1938, simultaneously in hundreds of towns and villages in Germany and Austria, thousands of Jews were terrorized, persecuted and victimized. A November program known alternatively as Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, also led to the desecration of over 1,200 synagogues and thousands of Jewish shops, businesses and homes were desecrated, looted and burned. Countless individuals were attacked, abused and beaten. Sequence of events that preceded that November terror, including increasing restrictions and disenfranchisement of Jews in Germany and Austria, a wave of arrests in May and June in 1938, the expulsion of Polish-born Jews from Germany to the border with Poland in October 1938, and Herschel Greenspan's mortal attack on German diplomat Ernst von Rath in Paris on November 7, 1938. Nazi Minister of Propaganda Goebbels used this as a pretext for launching the terror, although there is evidence that it had apparently already been planned for some time. The Nazi Party seized the opportunity to incite mass anti-Jewish violence, claiming it was a spontaneous popular retaliation against the enemy within. As a result, approximately 90 people were killed and over 25,000 Jewish men were arrested and deported to Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen, leading to the deaths of hundreds more in the camps. Immediately afterwards, on November 12, 1938, Nazi leaders met to assess the outcomes of the operation, which goes further expropriation, expulsion, deportation, and extermination of the Jews. Poland was invaded in September 1939. What was declared, and the so-called final solution was the Holocaust. That was the Holocaust gathered pace.
We turn to page 36 for the words of the Baruch Hu as we rise in body or in spirit to praise the Holy One. Seated, top of page 37. We praise you, eternal our God, whose presence fills creation. Your word brings on the evening twilight. You open the gates of dawn with wisdom, and with foresight you make the times pass and the seasons change.
Your plans as the course of the stars in the sky, creating day and night, turning light into darkness and darkness into light.
You make the day fade away and bring on the night, separating day and night. You rule the hosts of heaven.
We praise you, eternal one, who brings on the evening twilight.
Ruth, would you lead us in the second reading, please?
This is from Paul Dreyfus to Günzburg, Basel, regarding the situation of the Jewish population in Germany, 27th of November, 1938. The night of 9th to 10th November, at 3 o'clock in the morning precisely, the building in which I lived and in which there was a small Jewish shop shook. Both the window panes were smashed in and the contents of the shop windows were also ruined. Soon afterwards, I heard the shattering of the window panes from this part of the city as I used to sleep with the window open. 1 hour later, the same thing happened again. There was a second attack on what remained intact of the shop windows, even in the house in which I lived. Here from my window, I saw a small car drive up, 2 men in plain clothes get out and smash the windows. Obviously, everything had been arranged precisely, because the men got back in to do the same thing nearby. At about 6 o'clock in the morning, a third group then came, who also wreaked destruction once again, as far as there was anything left to destroy. During these 3 hours, again and again, the rattle of guns could be heard periodically through the streets, and the smoke from the Fassenstrasse synagogue already hinted at what may have taken place. At any rate, it was a well-planned operation, which had been carried out by the SA, SS, and Hitler youth in plain clothes. In a barber shop, one man who had taken part said in my presence that they had been drinking until about 3 o'clock in the morning to prepare for the operation. During its execution, many Jews had been clobbered. The next morning, a nightmarish picture presented itself, and the smoking Fassenstrasse synagogue was like a beacon. The people examined the devastation silently, as far as I could tell, and probably to some extent also within a turmoil. In Hamburg, it was said to me that the temple were not set on fire, but only destroyed.
We turn to the words of the Shema as we rise in body or spirit on page 40. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol lavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'otecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom ha'levarecha v'shinamtam b'lecha v'dibratam v'shivtecha b'techa u'lechtecha b'derech u'shavtecha u'vkumecha u'kshartam le'od ha'yedecha v'ayutotachot b'einecha u'chtabtam ha'mitzvot b'techa u'b'sharecha למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Page 42. All this we hold to be true and certain. The eternal alone is our God. There is none else, and we are Israel, God's people. You perform wonders without number, marvels that surpass our understanding.
You are just forth light and revive us when we stumble.
You did wonders for us in Egypt, miracles and marvels in the land of Pharaoh.
You led your people Israel out forever to serve you in freedom.
When your children beheld your power, they praised you and gave you thanks. Freely they accepted your sovereignty, and Moses, Miriam, and all Israel sang these words to you with great joy. Page 44, the same words our ancestors sang at the shore of Freedom Sea.
Oh,
As you redeemed Israel and saved us from arms stronger than our own, so may you redeem all those who are still oppressed and persecuted. We praise you, Eternal One, Redeemer of Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael. Harold, I believe you're reader number 3.
Report regarding the verbal abuse of Jewish children in German schools, from German schools. In one school, an Aryan schoolboy is said to have been punished for bad behavior instead of the usual punishments. The teacher decided to make the punishment worse. He had to sit next to a Jewish pupil for an hour. A Jewish father was advised to take his child out of school voluntarily. Otherwise, the teacher would see to it that he came home crying and bawling every day. One of the worst Nazis in the head is the head of the Nuremberg Girls' School, who had only 2 Jewish girls in one class of this school, came up to the front and told them that it was scandalous that they were still here because they belonged to the inferior race of Russian Schneider. Race defilers, Nazi term for a person involved in a relationship between a Jew and a non-Jew. He bullied the 2 children in this way so severely that they went home overcome with tears. A 4-year-old Christian child comes home from kindergarten and says, "We've been told we mustn't speak to the stinking Jews anymore."
Page 45, the words of the Hashkivenu prayer. We pray that as we lay down at night, we might wake up in the morning to renewed life, peace, and strength. David, you're the 4th reader.
Report regarding the November pogrom events in Dusseldorf. On the night of the 9th to 10th of November, at around midnight, my telephone rang. A gentleman from K announced himself and begged me to take him in as something terrible had happened, and asked whether he could come at once. Of course I agreed to this, and this gentleman came to me dreadfully agitated, without hat, without coat, pale, and described to me the following occurrence. He was sitting in a Jewish cafe when a gang of young uniformed SA men stormed into the cafe holding raised revolvers and cried, "Revenge for Paris!" He heard a shot, and at the same moment the entire cafe was smashed to pieces, during which this gentleman was able to escape. I add that in the meantime the owner of the cafe has died from his injuries. It was absolutely ghastly to observe this. He ran to the Königsallee, main street of Dusseldorf, where he saw that the window pane of a Jewish fashion house was being smashed in. He heard the people cry, "Hang the Jews on the trees!" This gentleman stayed with me for a short time. Naturally, I invited him to stay the night in my flat, but he wanted to go home. I gave him money and a coat and did not believe that the homes would be affected too. Yet hardly had this man gone when I heard a dreadful rattling and racket in the neighbouring house. I ran to the window and heard a gang of young men already on the street there as well, saying, "So, now in this house and to the families." I heard that they also wanted to come to me, quickly locked the door of my flat, my bedroom door, fetched my sleeping boy from his bed, since I was alone with him, and locked myself in the bathroom. Since 2 other Jewish families lived in my house, when I heard the same dreadful battering and screaming below, I assumed that the people too were being attacked. Then the same thing happened on the same floor next to me, and a short time afterwards my flat door was also smashed in, and about 20 young people stormed in, immediately wrecked my whole flat with hatchets and pickaxes. The glass panes were smashed, the furniture squashed, everything broken to pieces, the pictures cut, the backs and seats of the furniture chopped, the tabletop smashed into pieces. In short, everything wrecked, and at the end all the furniture thrown in a pile. When these people had left the flat, so as to continue their work of destruction in the neighbouring houses, I emerged from the bathroom with my boy and sought the other occupants of the house. A gentleman in the same house had been beaten about the head with a rubber truncheon when he had been sent upstairs. Nothing was left for these people either.
We turn together to the words of Chatzi Kaddish on page 49. Yitkadol v'yitkadosh shmei Rabo. Amen. Ve'amad yivrach yirteh v'yamlit malchutei b'chayecha yomecha u'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael.
Matira Surim, Ukayem Emunato, Mishnei Afar, Michamocha Ba'al Gevurot, Uli Dom Melech, Melech B'nei Yisrael, U'Matzliach Yeshua, Ve'Ha'anatam L'Hayot HaKol, Baruch Atah Adonai, V'Chayei HaKol.
Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, u'kdoshim b'chol yom yahallelu chesed. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh. Please be seated. Andrea, you're reading number 5.
Report by Mr. Frank Dusseldorf regarding death and looting during the November pogrom. Rabbi Eshkel Baker, who was taken from his home, which was completely wrecked and imprisoned. Frau Dr. E. wanted to accompany her husband, but did not so after she learned that she would not be allowed to remain in the same cell as him. What took place at Rabbi Klein's must have been terrible, because his home has been totally wrecked. It has been established that he was mistreated, but no details of that are known. His wife was also mistreated. Both were arrested, as well as their son, aged 13, and a paying guest of about the same age. However, on Friday, Frau Klein and the 2 children were set free again. The reporter himself buried 6 people, 5 men and a woman. These fatalities are strongly connected with the pogroms. Nothing would have moved the reporter to communicate the names of the fatal victims and the causes of death. He did say that a man suffocated in his room after the beds were set on fire. The reporter also could not give an estimated indication about the number of wrecked homes. He did, however, state that hardly a home was spared, including that of the cantor of the community, who was seriously wounded in the war, however. Very many homes were robbed and plundered during and after the destruction, and not only valuables such as jewelry, gold, etc., but also lingerie, linen, etc. Until Friday, the 18th November, Jews could still buy food in many shops, so that one cannot speak of an immediate food emergency. The welfare office of the synagogue community, in which Frau Dr. Eckenbacher and Fräulein Levischen are active, is also working. In this Laken, private houses were burned, not only the synagogue. At night, the children were fetched from the orphanage and taken to a schoolroom. After the orphanage was totally wrecked, the children were taken back again. The reporter also could not make an indication of the number of people arrested in Dusseldorf, but it is certainly a very large number. The younger of those arrested are said to have been taken to Dachau. The rest find themselves 10 to a cell. Apparently, they are allowed to cater for themselves and can also play cards. Herr Frank Dusseldorf.
We turn to the words of the Avodah prayer on page 57. Let's say Adonai Eloheinu, Be'alcha Yisrael, U'tefilatam, Be'alcha Tikabel, Baruch atah, Adonai, Al-Machazir Shechinato, Let's see. Michael, your reader number 6.
The destruction of the synagogue in Potsdam, an eyewitness report. The beautiful synagogue in Potsdam, which had been festively inaugurated in June 1903 on the same site of Wilhelmplatz as a Jewish place of worship founded by Frederick the Great long ago, was destroyed during the pogrom days, much as almost all the synagogues in Germany. This is an eyewitness report. The doorbell of our home rang at 5:30 in the morning on the 10th of November, a ringing that was gruesome and that I will not forget to the end of my life. I knew the meaning of this ringing immediately. When I opened the door, having dressed myself provisionally, I found my fears were confirmed. 5 men in plain clothes stood before me. Their leader identified himself as a Gestapo officer and explained to me immediately that I was being arrested, with the comment that any attempt to escape would lead to the use of their weapons. As my son came out of his room at that moment, he was also arrested. We had to dress in the presence of the officer. Then I was ordered to hand over the keys to the synagogue and the community ledgers. When I remarked that I did not have them, but the keys were with the area warden and the ledgers were with the treasurer, we were both loaded into a car that drove us to the police headquarters where my son was deposited. I myself had to go back to the synagogue with the men. A dark bunch of cape-line, reckless, conspiratorial shapes in plain clothes were already waiting there, dangerous-looking young lads holding sinister-seeming tools. Because the main door to the synagogue would not yield to the storming by this strong gang of approximately 20 to 25 men, I had to take the leader to the side door where the warden was rung for. As it was taking too long for the men until the old woman appeared, the door was pushed in, and now I took the leader through the side entrance into the synagogue. It did not appear solemn enough for the head of the gang, and so he screamed at me, "We still want to be led to the holiest of places." I retorted to him that we were just on the way there. We were soon standing between the rabbi's pulpit and the prayer leader's lectern. At the same moment, the gang that had assembled in front of the main door to the synagogue pushed forwards again, and now an atrocious picture was acted out at lightning speed before my eyes. It could not have been more than 4 or at most 5 minutes. The entire place of worship was turned into a barrel heap of rubble. All the windows were smashed with thoughtfully brought along wooden hand grenades of the type used for practice by the army. All the lights were pulled down, the benches were wrecked, the women's gallery was demolished, the rabbi's seat, the chairman's bench chopped up, the curtains torn to shreds, the Torah scrolls ripped to pieces, the large menorah used as a crowbar. In short, nothing but absolutely nothing remained whole.
We turn to the words of Modim on page 59. Modim anachnu lav, she'atamu Adonai Eloheinu. Modim anachnu lav, she'atamu Adonai. Modim anachnu lav,
The reality of faith. The whole world is a narrow bridge, but the essential thing is not to be consumed by fear. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. Eternal God, we look to you, our true center and the center of all things, in the triumphs and the tragedies of our lives, as well as in our successes and failures. For in you alone can we be satisfied, and in you alone creation is fulfilled. We lay our sufferings in your hands, though we do not know their purpose. May they be used for good. All we want as Jews is to live and uphold the sanctity of life. All we want is to create peace and create in peace, to bear witness that people are not necessarily one another's enemies, that every war is senseless, that the solution lies in compassion, and that compassion is possible. All we want is peace, and yet there is upheaval. So how can one not be sad today? How can one be in this world of ours and not despair? One day, Hasidim came to inform the great Rebbe Nachman of Bratslav of renewed persecution of Jews in the Ukraine. The master listened and said nothing. Then they told him of pogroms in certain villages. Again, the master listened and said nothing. The master listened, and shook his head. I know, he whispered. I know what you want, I know. You want me to shout with pain, weep in despair. I know, but I will not. You hear me? I will not. Then after a long silence, he did begin to shout louder and louder. Gewalt Yidden, Jews, for heaven's sake, do not despair. Gewalt Yidden, Jews, for heaven's sake, do not despair. Elie Wiesel, 1928 to 2016. Shoah survivor and winner of the Nobel Peace Prize.
We pray for peace in the words of Shalom Rav, page 63. Shalom Rav, Israel, Tassim Le'olam. Shalom Rav, Israel, Tassim Le'olam. Ki atah melech adon, lecho hashalom. Ki atah melech adon, lecho hashalom. Shalom Rav, al Yisrael Tassim Le'olam. Shalom Rav, al Yisrael Tassim Le'olam. V'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael. Bechol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. Shalom Rav, al Yisrael Tassim Le'olam. Shalom Rav, al Yisrael Tassim Le'olam. Tassim Le'olam. Tassim Le'olam. Frank, your reader number 8.
It was a cold winter of 1944, and though we had nothing like Calvis, my father, who was my fellow prisoner in the concentration camp, called Les Roses, took me and some of our friends to a corner of our barracks. He announced that it was the eve of Hanukkah, produced a curious-shaped clay bowl, and began to light a wick immersed in his precious, but now melted margarine ration. But before he could recite the blessing, I protested at this waste of food. He looked at me, and then at the lamb, and finally said, "You and I have seen that it is possible to live up to 3 weeks without food. We once lived almost 3 days without water, but you cannot live properly for 3 minutes without hope." Written by Hugo Gritten, Rabbi of the West London Synagogue in 1964 to 1996.
We take a few moments to pray the words of our own hearts. Page 66. May the one who causes peace to reign in the high heavens, let peace descend on us, on all Israel, and all the world.
Oh, say shalom, Hallelujah, say shalom, Aleinu, Be'al Yisrael, Be'al Oh, say shalom, Hallelujah, say shalom, Aleinu, Be'al Yisrael, Be'al Bnei Adam, Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, Shalom Aleinu, Be'al Yisrael, 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 Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, Shalom Aleinu, Be'al Yisrael.
It's now my pleasure to call upon Arlene Botnick, our Director of Education, to introduce our guest speaker for this evening.
Each year, it has been our custom at Solel to remember Kristallnacht by inviting a Holocaust survivor to tell us a story. And today, as we heard the readings and we'll hear from our guest speaker, that story doesn't seem to be just a story of the past. What we heard tonight was resonating with so many of us because some of those same things appear to be happening again. Our guest speaker was just a child. As a matter of fact, when his father was taken away, Joe had not even been born. He ended up being raised as a Catholic, so he wouldn't die as a Jew. His mother abandoned him or left him to live, and she went and worked for the Polish underground, and he was left to be raised by a wonderful family that took care of him. And he was brought up as if he were their child, and he was a Catholic. In 1945, Joe was 3 years old, and Berlin fell. And all he remembers about the Holocaust is the sweet, warm taste of fresh milk on the day Germany surrendered. Mr. Gottender's parents never spoke about the Holocaust. As we know, many survivors never spoke. But an uncle who died just a few years ago basically, quote, never shut up about it, speaking at local schools and events sponsored by the United Jewish Appeal of Greater Toronto. Mr. Gottlinger moved to Canada in 1958 and went on to study business and economics at the University of Western Ontario and has made the Holocaust remembrance his life cause. He's had a successful career in real estate and mortgage lending and has endowed so many Jewish foundations with the money he has earned, in particular the Gottender Family Foundation. Yad Vashem, the Israel-based World Authority on the Holocaust Remembrance, is his main beneficiary. As he said, they are in the forefront not only of Holocaust remembrance, but Holocaust education. And that's why he sponsored their new wing of International School for Holocaust Studies. And I had the privilege of studying at the Holocaust Studies for International Jewish Teachers. It is a contribution that none of us should ever ignore, because we have to speak up. A nation, a people can never be defeated spiritually or otherwise, as long as we remember and speak up and know who we are. So thank you very much for joining us this evening, and I'd like Solel to welcome Joe Gottinger, our survivor for the evening.
Thank you very much, Arlene. And I have nothing more to say. She told the whole story. Good Shabbos, everyone. And it really is my pleasure to be here this evening. As Arlene said, I speak to schools and other organizations, but mainly to schools. And it's very interesting. I'll be speaking to 30, 40 students, and I look at them, and their eyes are just, you know, they don't even look like they're paying attention. Then at the end, I ask for questions, and everybody's hand rises, so I guess they were absorbing it. Anyway, I was born in Poland, so I'll go back to before my birth. It was 1939. Poland was invaded by the Germans. I think it took them about 7 or 8 days, and they surrendered. My parents, on both sides, excuse me, lived in a little shtetl named Mielec, which is in eastern Poland, about 110 kilometers from Krakow. They're both observant families. My father's family had a sawmill and forest where they got the wood and brought it to the sawmill. And my dad told me that one day in 1939, a few weeks after the Germans arrived, a tank broke down the front gates. A Jeep came behind. A German came out and said, "This is now the property of the German Reich." And my father and my uncle, they ran the excuse me, the sawmill for the Germans until 1942. And things got progressively worse from 39 to 42. And in 1942, all the remaining Jews of Mielec were rounded up and brought into the main square, and there was the infamous selection was made. Those who could work were sent to an aircraft factory just outside of Mielec. Those who could not were taken into the forest and shot. And that was the end of Jewish life in Mielec, which was a very vibrant Eastern European shtetl until that time. As Arlene said, even before my dad was taken away, my mother and I went to a town called Sandomierz, which is just north of Mielec, where I was born in a convent hospital. And my mother, who was blonde and blue-eyed, had false ID, and from there we went to the family named the Jolos. My parents had known them for years, and they, knowing what was happening, they made arrangements for my mother and I to go to their farm. But unfortunately, in about a month or two being there, my mother, who was a graduate of the university in Krakow, the Jagiellonia University, spotted a fellow student of hers. She panicked, thought that she might be given up, and as Arlene said, she left and went with the Polish Underground. I stayed there for 3 years, raised by this, well, loving family, and they had a son who ostensibly was my brother. And a lot of these things I've been told, and so one thing that really stands out for me is that things got a little hot there with the Germans, so they were going to move me to a family of the cousins of theirs in another town. And a couple of days before I was supposed to leave, they got word that don't bring him because the next door neighbors were found out to harbor Jews. The Jews and the family were shot in the front yard because in Poland, and this was the only place in Europe where harboring Jews was a capital offense. Not in Germany, not in France, but for some reason it was Poland. So it was it was a death sentence if you were found out. So I was there until, Arlene said, in 1945, and miraculously my mother and father both survived. My dad went through about 3 or 4 concentration camps with 2 of my uncles, and out of a very large extended family on both sides, what was left was my father, my mother, 2 uncles, and 1 aunt. So 5 individuals. Everyone else perished. We went to Germany to, it's called the DP camp, a displaced persons camp. And fortunately, because my uncle had some schlep, best terminology I could use, we were billeted in at a farmhouse and had a very, very easy, I mean, considering what we came from, life there. My Catholicism continued. As I said, Arlene said, I was raised as a Catholic. And my parents were very, very cognizant of the fact that I had to be sort of weaned out of Catholicism. Like I could not go from Catholic to Jew overnight. And so when I went by churches and I crossed myself, everything was all right. And then things continued in the Catholic way, in that I went to a Catholic school in Germany, in Bavaria, which is very, very Catholic. From there, we moved to the US, and there we lived in Washington, D.C. And all through this time, I was always in the minority. Even in Washington, I was in the minority because we lived in a black neighborhood, so not only was I a Jew, but I was also a white Jew in the black neighborhood. But I made friends, and things were okay. My only problem was that I had to go 45 minutes by bus to a white school, even though a black school was right across the street from me because it was segregation at that time. From there we moved to Toronto, and that's where my Judaism really took hold, because we ended up in North York, and excuse me, I remember my first day at school at Northview Heights, and I was in the office waiting to be enrolled, and there was another young man there who was there for disciplinary reasons. And I mentioned to him, what a beautiful school. They had a swimming pool. It was just newly built. And from the inner city school that I had come from, this was wonderful. Thank you. So I said to this kid, this is a great school, it's wonderful. And he looked at me, he says, yeah, if you're a Jew. I didn't know what he was talking about. Then I found out later that the school was 85% Jewish. And this was a real turn of events, coming from predominantly, like all my life being a minority. Here I was a majority. And so from there I went to Western, and I got my education there. And I guess I'm going to leave it open for questions. Oh, the other thing is that my Catholicism continued because I'm married to a Catholic woman. So that's how I guess it goes. Anyway, but my kids, my first wife who had my kids, she converted. So my kids are all Jewish, and my grandchildren too. Any questions? Yes.
You mentioned you went to Western, correct?
Excuse me?
You went to Western Ontario? You went to Western Ontario University.
Yeah, I went to Western.
I'm curious what the climate was like at the time, because I know that currently liberal university colleges have, unfortunately, a bit of a bias towards Israel in a negative sense. I'm curious if that existed when you were studying as
Well, that was quite a while ago. I graduated in 1965, so I was, again, in the minority there. It was like a big high school. There was only 5,000 students. And mainly the Jewish kids that were there from Toronto were there doing medicine or pre-meds, which they couldn't get into at the U of T, so they went to Western. I went there because I heard it was a good business school, and that's what I wanted to do. And like anywhere else, there was some anti-Semitism, but nothing really overt, not like what we have now.
It's very, the tension's very palpable in post-secondary right now.
Yeah, and the thing is now, Western has become a favorite school of a lot of Jewish kids from Toronto.
So, thank you, but I have a question about today. So Kristallnacht was 76 years ago. The war was over in 1945. When you face anti-Semitism today in a school when you're young, what do you do? How do you handle it? Is there an answer, or?
It's hard to, I mean, I experienced it all through until I got to Toronto, I experienced all the anti-Semitism in schools all the time. It's hard to say. The only thing I can say now, the difference between now and 1939 is that we have Israel. And that is, that's the biggest difference. Like, they're not going to lead us to the gas chambers.
Thank God, because unfortunately, Kristallnacht is repeated over and over again in the minds of people. And it causes a crisis of faith. You know, when I was a kid growing up, I lived in a totally anti-Semitic neighborhood. And there were times when I felt it's so difficult to be Jewish. It's so tough. And of course, I didn't go through anything near what survivors have gone through, but it was still tough.
I understand. And what you have to fight also is assimilation. Because if you're in an anti-Semitic environment, the best way to sort of get away from it is to assimilate, but then you lose your Judaism. And I assimilated for a while in Washington, D.C., but in Toronto, I came out, and I think I came out big time. So
Comfort in numbers.
yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just want to comment your speech. So I want to tell you, I study in Arabic school. It's mostly Arabic school. So basically, I study in Cooksville Secondary School, and it's like 70% of Arabs there, and Muslims mostly, like 80% of Muslims. So how I'm dealing with anti-Semitism? Lots of people just going around the school and saying like, be careful. I'm just saying, try me. That's it. And nobody's gonna bully you. Nobody's gonna bully you. I'm just dealing with that. I understand that I'm Jew, and sometimes you have to deal with such things in your life. And for me, there's still anti-Semitism, but you have to deal with that. I understand this. For example, for me, I'm proud of being Jew. I was raised as a Jew, and yeah, they're saying like, be careful, and I'm saying, try me. You be careful. That's it.
I dealt with it as a child, as a teenager, because if anybody said something to me, my immediate response was physical. I wasn't afraid of anybody. But I have a granddaughter now who's 12 years old, who's going through the same thing, and she's not, I can't tell her to do what I did, because it would be a bad example, but not everybody is as strong as you are.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, and I have a question for you. Can I ask a question?
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just confused during the whole speech because like I didn't hear the one really important part. What year you were born? So,
What year was I born?
yeah.
1942, right in the middle of it at all. Yes.
You were talking about spending the war years with a Catholic family, and then presuming your parents who had survived came back to get you. Did Did you stay in touch with this Catholic family?
I'm glad you brought that up because that's a big part of what I usually speak about and I completely forgot about it. Yes, we stay in touch. After we left Poland, my parents would do what they could for them. They would send care packages and try to, help them out. Problem was with the communists, it was hard to get stuff to them because it would be intercepted at the border. Then my so-called brother, his daughter moved to Chicago, and I have been in touch with them since then. I have installed their parents at Yad Vashem, it's called the Righteous Among the Nations, and there was a ceremony in Ottawa, and the Prime Minister was there, and I brought them all in from Chicago, like the whole family, and it was a wonderful ceremony. And I remember after the ceremony, was the Ottawa Citizen, I think was a newspaper, the reporter came up to Betty, the daughter, the granddaughter, and asked her, why did your grandparents do what they did? And she was kind of lost for words, and she said, because they were those kind of people. Like, they risked their lives to save me and my mother. And I've been back to Poland numerous times in the village, and managed to find the grave of Joe, excuse me, the man of the family, and I'm still trying to do some research on the woman, Mrs. Joliffe. And a cousin of mine who's a documentary filmmaker is doing a documentary, and we went back to Poland, and a lot of things stood out, especially one incident where there was a woman in the village. We went to where the farm was, and she came out and she looked at me and she said, I knew they were harboring a Jew there. And she was so proud of herself. But and another time that I went through Poland was on a motorcycle with 11 Israelis. And that was very interesting, riding into town. And it was sort of like, here I am. And just one more little anecdote. When I went back to the village the first time, Mielec, obviously there was no Jews, there was just, and I went to a neighborhood where my parents' homes were, and there was a gentleman there, and I started speaking to him, and I asked him if that was the Gottlinger house, and he said yes, and he started rhyming off my father's name, my uncle's name, and I speak a little Polish, and then I said, my father's Polish name was Buju, and I said, Buju Sin, like Benny's son. And he turned as white as a sheet, almost like fell against a wall, because he didn't think there were any Jews survived. And me coming back was a testament that, there were some surviving Jews. And then we got out a bottle of scotch, and he took me into Sunday, he actually showed me where I was born. And here's another interesting anecdote. So then I went to my mother's home, and it was a little shack, more or less, because my mother's family was relatively poor. My dad's family was affluent. So we talked about, two sisters there were squatting because, the home was deserted after the Germans left. And just before I left, one of them went into another room and came out with a Shabbos candlesticks. And she said, this is the only thing that we saved from the Germans in this house. And we knew that someday someone would come for these. And if you go on YouTube, it's called Candles of Kindness. And Ellie Rubenstein, you know of him, and this was Shul Havanim, they did a little story on that. Again, it's called Candles of Kindness. Yes, sir.
All right. When I started to talk, because a couple of things you said, I could see some faces saying, that is in 1939, it's 2023. In 1939, 1942, when you were born, there was no Israel. And you alluded to the fact that the difference today is Israel. And yet, if you had to give an answer, why? Why then? Why now? Anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, what is it? If you have any answer, because I don't think any of us
First of all, it's
do.
anti-Israel. It's really anti-Semitism, in the guise of anti-Israel.
Sure it is.
And it's an age-old issue, and I don't know how it's ever going to change. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but we have to have a strong Israel, and that's about the best we can do for now, Arlene. I wish I had the answer. You know, it's mind-boggling, the whole situation. Like, what did we do that's so bad that we've been persecuted all these years? There's a thing that goes around on the internet, I don't know if you saw it or not, which is a list of all the Jewish Nobel laureates, and it's like this long. And then at the end of it, and I don't like saying this because I don't want to sound that what's the prejudice, Islamophobic, but then you see the Muslim Nobel laureates, 3. And when you think about it, all those 6 million that were killed, their genes, like there could have been the cure for cancer or who knows what, like having all those Nobel laureates from the people that survived, can you imagine what could be if those 6 million didn't perish?
There were 200 Nobel laureates who were Jewish. And that you can look this up on the internet. That's a letter from a pharmacy owner in response to what the head of Iran said about don't deal with Jews, don't accept any Jewish products,
Yeah.
don't go to Jewish doctors. And what he summed up is said, if you don't, you'll die.
Yeah.
That's it, you'll just die. You'll go blind, you'll have all sorts of diseases, and you won't be treated.
I mean, just a couple,
You would have a cell.
polio, Dr. Salk, even the latest one, which is the two that won the medicine for the vaccine, one of those two is Jewish.
You've answered my question, by the way.
What's that?
Well, the question was, why does it keep repeating itself? And the obvious answer is, we're still a minority, and we do well as a minority, and people continue to blame us for everything that happens in the world. It's just something that you carry with you.
It's mind-boggling. I just came back from Florida, the promised land, and was walking by an open-air bar, and obviously, I mean, there wasn't a Jew in there, and the guy who was singing started singing a Neil Diamond song, and everybody was singing along, and I just wondered how many of those people knew that Neil Diamond was Jewish. Yeah. Yes?
Back to the topic of Israel. I just got back a month ago from living in Israel for 2 years. And one thing that I really miss about being in Israel is I could walk around my neighborhood with my kippah on and not feel threatened. Back in Canada now, I don't feel safe to wear my kippah on the bus. Anywhere, I live in Brampton, I don't want to wear my kippah anywhere in public. I don't want the negative attention. My question to you would be, if you have to hide your Jewish identity, how do you protect yourself from not losing it, if that makes sense?
Sad commentary.
Sorry?
I said it's a sad commentary. I can't answer that.
Oh.
And like you said about wearing a kippah in Israel, one of my great pleasures was in Krakow when I went back the first time, walking down the street with my Thomas bag going to the synagogue for Rosh Hashanah. And, that in Krakow was so predominantly anti-Semitic during the years. And the only reason that the shul was still there was that the Germans used it as a command center. And that was a highlight. Yes.
You see? So I'm also wearing kippah all the time. So what I'm doing is I'm just walking around, wearing kippah, and while people are coming to me, and some people are coming and asking like, "Oh, you're Jew?" I'm saying yes. Do you support Israel? I'm saying yes. So and then they started asking questions like why. So what I'm doing, I'm researching some information, I'm educating myself. So and then I'm ready for an argument. But I'm not trying to argue with them to prove them something. I'm trying to see if they can prove me my position is wrong. So basically, if somebody's gonna prove me that like free Palestine, okay, it's fine. No, for me it's perfectly fine because like I understand I'm not a perfect person. I'm gonna say free Palestine if somebody's gonna prove me this. And if after this, I'm gonna ask my father if he's not gonna have an answer. I'm gonna say this. But the thing is, I'm just saying like not to lose your identity. You have to, I guess, acknowledge yourself.
Fight for it.
Fight for it. Yes, in fact. So the life is struggle.
I never thought that. Anyone else? Yes.
So how often do you go to school? You teach, or you share your story with schools? Is it elementary schools, is it high schools, and does the story differ at all when you tell it to younger children as opposed to high school students?
It's mainly elementary schools, and I usually start by, excuse me, if it's a more adult audience, I usually start by saying, you've heard Holocaust speakers before and all the horrific things that they went through, concentration camps and all of that. My story is a little bit uplifting because it was one of the bright things that during the war was the righteous among the nations. And if you go to Israel, there's they used to plant trees for each of the righteous. They ran out of space. So now there's tablets on the wall. And I did manage to do one for my on the tablet there. And they're doing a new, there's a new thing, project that's happening is they're Valley the Communities, where they're going to have an interactive display and monuments to all the communities of Eastern Europe that were destroyed during the war. So the Valley of the Communities. And by the way, the school that I sponsored, I just found out that they are using the facility to take in children from the areas that were decimated by Hamas. And they're there, and they're taken care of, and they're fed, they have a lunch every day, and it's a school now. So it's a facility is very well used. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for coming tonight and for sharing your story, and not only your story, but also your wisdom, which is so much needed, I think, by our community at this time in history, even more so, perhaps, than it has been in the past. And we're also grateful that you are sharing your story with young people in Canada and throughout the world, because that needs to be told over and over again. As we're living through right now a very difficult time, and we're realizing that it's only through those sharing of those stories and the reminders and teaching, that's what can make a difference in the world. We're going to continue on page 149 with the words of Aleinu. As we rise, we pray for the day when the world will be one and at peace. Aleinu Shalei Adon Hakol, Lateit Gdula Yosef Breshit, Asher Samkel Kedriya Shelo, Vedor Aleinu Olim John, you're reading number 9.
If worry and despondency seek our undoing, then we should think about Yiscor in a way that we identify ourselves with Aranim Tovim, good guarantors, carrying on the work of our ancestors from Sinai, in that we are parents of the future generations. Then the chain does not break, and we gain the strength to carry out nobly these historical responsibilities, and to thank God sincerely that Yiscor has become the celebration of our soul. Rabbi Regina Jonas Harav Malka Reina Batsev Wolf Vasara, the first woman rabbi, born in Berlin in 1902, ordained in Germany 1935, deported to Theresienstadt November 6, 1942, deported and murdered in Auschwitz October 12, 1944.
At this time, our thoughts turn to all those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those of our friends and neighbors, and all those people whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. We remember at this time the name of Dr. Rani Hakim, for whom we are in Shloshim this week. And we recall the names of the following whose yahrzeit, the anniversary of whose death occurs this week. Garnett Douglas, the father of David. Shel Grossman, the late wife of David, the mother and mother-in-law of Sharon, Naomi, and Mike, and the grandmother of Jacob and Wesley. Ron Subeck, the father of Phil, my father-in-law, and grandfather of our children, Seth, Gil, and Rachel. Ada Farkas, the mother of Linda Hannon, the grandmother of Jonathan and Christine, Michael and Vanessa, and the great-grandmother of Reese, Lucy, Clark, and Harrison. Ben Taub, the father of Esther Turner, the grandfather of Arlene, Jonathan, and Miriam. Malka Lipschitz, the mother of Leah Haller. Faye Rosen, the mother of Natalie. Mary Consett, the mother of George and the grandmother of Hannah and Zachary. Arthur Hosius, the brother of Leonard. Katrina DeWild, the mother of the late Greta DeLue, the grandmother of Joanna Pagrak and Eva Romberg, Catherine Frank, and the great-grandmother of Ashley. David Freeman, the brother and brother-in-law of Harvey and Marlene Friedman. Helen Weinstein, the mother of Sharon Citron and the grandmother of Carrie and Benjamin. Philip Schulman, the father of Charles Schulman and the grandfather of Holly Schulman. Victoria Rebecca Brown, the mother of Lee Bauer and the late Sam Brown, the grandmother of Joel and Dove, the great-grandmother of Noah, Isaac, Harrison, and Shana. Leib Weirba, the father of Nina Eilson. Maurice Levy, the uncle of Shirley Herman. Maria Grunwald, the sister of Eva Sarker. Max Goldberg, the father of Philip and the grandfather of Alina, Michelle, and Gid Herman. And Sarah Schur, the mother of Linda Sage Alexander, the grandmother of Alex Sage. If you are all observing a yahrzeit this week and we don't have them on the list, you're invited at this time to share their name aloud or to hold those names in your heart. As we ask those who are in mourning to please rise first. We say to Min HaMakom Tinachamu, may you find comfort in God's sheltering presence. Now as a community we all rise to support those who are mourning and to say Kaddish for those who have no one to say it for them. Page 159. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlik malchutei, v'chayefon v'yamechon, v'chayetachol be'Yisrael, v'agalam v'zman kari v'imramim. Yehi shmei Rabbah v'rach le'alam olam me'amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromach v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudusha b'richu, le'elam v'yikol birchata v'shirata, tushvachata v'nechamata, damiram v'yalma v'imramim. Yehi shlama Rabbah v'yishemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'chol Yisrael, v'imramim. Oseh shalom b'imramav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'chol Yisrael, v'al kol b'nei adam, v'imramim. May the source of peace send peace to all those who mourn, and comfort to all who are bereaved among us, among all of our people, and among all the nations and families of earth. We say together. Amen. Please be seated. At this time, it is my pleasure to call upon John Lewson, our president, to bring greetings and announcements.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I want to start off by thanking our guest speaker on behalf of the board for the time that you've taken for sharing your personal experiences and very moving presentation tonight. Thank you. I also want to thank Joel Brown, our tech volunteer, and Isaiah, our shamus. For current updates and activities and announcements, please subscribe to the Solel Facebook, Solel Instagram, accounts on our website. Just a summary of a few upcoming events. Tomorrow, Saturday the 18th, please join us for a family service and bring in favorite desserts to share with all families. It's a special story for our children as well. On Sunday, the 19th, card making workshop will be held from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. And Miriam Skuman has more information on that. On Sunday, November the 19th as well, from 9 to 2 p.m. is Latka making with David Gordon. And on November the 21st, mid-morning snack and learn with Danielle Farrell, who is our guest from Alts Peel Society, and that will start at 10:30 a.m. In person and on Zoom. Just a reminder, Solel's Living Torah Project this is part of our 50th anniversary celebrations, and Solel is making excellent progress with our project to create our first brand new Torah scroll. So if you haven't already done so, we invite you to be part of this exciting project by sponsoring a letter, a word, a phrase, a verse, a parasha, and more. And if you can do this either in your own name or in honor of somebody special. And to learn more about this exciting initiative, please check our Living Torah Project page on the website. And any contributions received by the end of December will qualify for a 2023 tax receipt. If you're visiting Solel as a visitor, if you have questions, or if you're a member with something on your mind, please feel free to speak to me or any of the 5 board members who are with us tonight. I see Ruth, Andrea, Roz, Emma, and Joel. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and we want to wish John and Brenda and their family mazel tov on their new granddaughter that was born this week. Kiddush is on page 163, and we invite Joel to lead us in Kiddush. Please rise and join with him, and then we'll close with closing Zmira.
Vahi Erev, Vahi Boker, Yom HaShishi. Now the whole universe, sky, earth, and all their array was completed. With the 7th day, God had ended the work of creation and rested with all work completed. Then God blessed the 7th day and called it holy. For with this day, God had completed the work of creation. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu mitzvotav v'ratzav banu, v'shabbat kodsho v'ahavah v'rasa b'chimanu, zikaron l'maaseh b'reishit, kibun yom tevilah
Please join me on page 172 as we close our service this evening with the singing of Ani Ve'ata, the words of the late great Arik Einstein. You and I, we will change the world. Shabbat Shalom. Please come and join us in the Kiddush room for Oneg Shabbat.